Continuing our conversation about today's kids as we turn our attention now to 16-year-old Kaylee Gain. Kaylee, of course, the Missouri girl who was critically injured during a fight on March 8th near her St. Louis high school. Kaylee suffered a fractured skull. Although her condition is now stable, she's been moved out of intensive care. It's unclear, though, whether she has regained consciousness after her head was repeatedly bashed into the cement pavement. Really hard to watch. The extent of the brain damage she has suffered also remains unknown. The family of the girl who has been charged with Kaylee's beating now says she is the real victim and had been harassed and bullied before being caught on video during the brutal beatdown of Kaylee. The 15-year-old's aunt said that her niece, the one who repeatedly smashed Kaylee's head into the ground, is actually an honor student with a stellar record at Hazelwood East High and was merely defending herself during the fight. The accused attacker's loved ones are asking the juvenile court system to show compassion. That's the word they used for the teen. They're seeking $150,000 in donations, by the way, towards her legal defense. But is there more at work here than just a school brawl between two teens that turned tragic? For an answer, take a look at this headline. Missouri Attorney General blames high schools' radical DEI programs for vicious fight between teenage girls. So listen to what the Attorney General of Missouri, Andrew Bailey, had to say.
This is a school district who in 2021 promoted radical DEI programs in place of school safety. In other words, we are more in favor of racial divisiveness than in having school resource officers on their campuses. In August of 2021, it was announced that the school was requiring the uniformed police officers who were in the schools to take the school district's DEI training. And the police agencies refused. They declined to do so. So the schools booted them off campus. And so what role did this radical divisive DEI indoctrination program play in preventing a police officer from being present and detecting this and or from causing a racial divisiveness that may have motivated this fight? And I think the school did an enormous amount of culpability. And look at their statement. There's no moral clarity there. They don't mention the victim once.
They don't mention the victim once. Shameful. Joining us now with insight is conservative writer and political analyst Eduardo Neret. Eduardo, good to see you. So identity politics rearing its ugly head once again. This time, though, it almost turned deadly. I thought the left, Eduardo, was all about compassion. Instead, they seem more about division.
Well, your statement there, the statement from the family member of the alleged perpetrator, that's outrageous. I mean, the idea that you need to bash someone's head into the pavement to defend yourself is absurd. And I think it speaks to the whole story here. I mean, anyone who watched that video, as you said, is horrified. I was angry watching it. And I was angry because the idea that a person, forget a person, a student in the United States could go to school and could be beaten to the point of near death in this country, it's an outrage. It should be outrageous that this is happening. And I think it really speaks to where we're at as a society. It speaks to where we're at as a school system. I mean, these types of crimes seem to be on the rise. You open X, you open Instagram, and you'll be inundated with these types of horrific crime videos on social media. And that's problematic enough. Whatever the stats are, the perception that these crimes are increasing is problematic enough. And you want to know what the worst part about all of this is? I mean, when you have problems like this in a society, you have to be able to talk about them to fix it. And we can't talk about it in this country because the corporate media has hardly touched this story. I don't think we have to guess why. I think if you look at who the victim is and who the perpetrator is, and if the roles were reversed, this story would receive a lot more coverage. And by the way, rightfully so. I mean, I don't care what the background of any sort of victim is. No student of any color, no young person of any color should be beaten like this in a schoolyard fight. And whatever the background is, it should be talked about. But in this case, we can't even have the conversation.
Yeah, you bring up such a great point, because I thought the same thing, Eduardo, when I saw this the first time. I actually, and this is so horrific, but I actually see things like this all the time. Videos like this of kids, looks racial, looks like it could have been DEI caused a lot of times. And we know that this stuff is happening daily, like you said. But how come this particular video, do you think, caught the attention of the media like some of the others haven't?
Well, I've seen some of these, and this one in particular was just so hard to watch. First of all, the idea that someone's filming without intervening, that speaks to one aspect of it. I mean, a lot of times these crime videos, maybe the person who's filming is several feet away. They're not even involved. But the person who was filming here clearly probably knew some of the individuals. I think that speaks to the outrage. But on the larger point here, I mean, I think equity and DEI have played a role. Look, this story Obama administration, back in 2013 with the Dear Colleague letter, Obama directed the head of the Justice Department and the head of the Education Department to end what is called the so-called school-to-prison pipeline. In other words, Obama, his administration, felt like it was racist that certain students were being punished in school and that those students were more likely to end up in prison. So what did they do as a result? Instead of suspending and expelling students, they had these sort of, and I'm not making this up, they had listening sessions, they had self-esteem sessions to help these students and really cover up for their behavior. And I want to talk about the real world effects of that. I mean, it's not just this case, but Broward County, which is near where both of us are right now, they were one of the first school districts to adopt this. The school superintendent was an Obama acolyte. And so what did they do? They had students like Nicholas Cruz, who had been reported to the police many times. His behavioral issues, his, I guess, transgressions were covered up. And what did he end up doing? He ended up going into Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and killing over 12 students. So there are consequences to this. I mean, they do it in the name of equity, DEI, whatever you want to call it. But what you have is federal officials, school, local, and state officials in some states saying, well, it would be bad for us, it would be racist for us to hold this student accountable. Let's give him another chance. Let's give him another chance. And so I think we all have to ask ourselves here, what could the parents be doing differently? I mean, this starts in the home. What could the school districts be doing differently, the superintendents? And then what could our leaders be doing differently? What policies could we implement to make sure that these types of attacks don't happen?
I think you make great points there, and I think the fundamental point is that we need to open up a conversation, that's key when it comes to these sorts of things. These are obviously emotionally charged situations, and it's easy to jump to conclusions about what led to it, but I think the focus needs to be, how do we get to that sort of violence, and how do we stop that sorts of violence from happening?
100%. And I think when you aren't able to have the conversation, that only fuels whatever perceived division is out there. So whether people want to look at this video or other similar videos and have a racial conclusion about them, or have a Democrat versus Republican conclusion about them, whatever that division line is, when you can't have an honest conversation, people are only going to be further cemented in their position. They're going to feel like they're being prevented from talking about it. And look, I want to point out, if the roles were reversed here, it would be a different conversation. We don't have to look very far. Look at George Floyd, for example. I know that's an extreme case, but why do I bring that up? Well, regardless of what people think about George Floyd's death, the fact is he had a criminal history. And despite that, even though he had a criminal history and his death was broadcast on TV, you have the president of the United States pushing for a federal law to be passed in his name. You had politicians all over the country talking about him. And so we can disagree with what those politicians were invoking his name for, but the point is we had a conversation. And in this case, whether it's this crime video, whether it's in other schools, whether it's in the big cities, when people just act like it's not happening, I think that further divides us as a country, and it further prevents us from solving the problem.
Eduardo, great insight. We hope you'll come back. That was great. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.